get there though. We look at life past grade 12. I don't know, gangsters, if I could say. Like, after finding out I was pregnant, it was kind of like, Mom's and sex? And she's like, you don't talk about that. So I'm Dr. Mumtaaz Emeran-Thomas, but people call me Dr. Taz or the People's Doctor. I'm a medical doctor by profession. I'm also a health activist and a teenage pregnancy prevention advocate. That's a mouthful. I grew up in Cape Town, but now I reside in Johannesburg. Oof, that was a long time ago. But my teenagehood in Cape Town, what that looked like for me was I was surrounded by a lot of, I don't know, gangsters, if I could say, and people that didn't really look at life past grade 12. There was nothing for them, and they had a lot of aspirations, don't get me wrong. It's just they weren't afforded the opportunities to go further than matric. So yes, that was kind of what my teenagehood looked like. When I first found out I was pregnant, I was 15 years old, sitting on my mom's bed, terrified, because my mom had worked so hard to get me through primary school, now into high school, in a Model C school, working overtime, and now I've disappointed her. So not only was I afraid, it was also lonely, because when I disclosed this to her, my entire family was disappointed, rightfully so. So it was very disheartening, very lonely, very sad. It wasn't what other people made it out to be. My pregnancy, being a teenage mom, was taboo. And everything, if you think of taboo, every emotion that comes with, that's what I felt when I found out I was pregnant. So being a teen mom, what that entailed for me was going to school. Or just a little bit of context. So when my son was born, he was a premature baby, so he was in the neonatal ICU for 3 months. So with that in mind, I would go to school every day, and at the end of school, I'll get dropped off in front of the hospital and then go see him, do my homework next to his incubator, and that was my life. After 3 months of doing that, going to school, then going to sit next to him in the hospital for 3 months, when he came home, it was so strange, because for 3 months there were nurses taking care of him, right? So you kind of like don't really feel the motherhood. And then when he came home, I didn't know what to expect. No one's telling me, Taz, this is how you deal with motherhood. My mom just assumed that role and took care of me and my son. And that really helped me, because I recall sitting at home with my son there and thinking, I don't know what to do. He's crying, and now what? And my mom gracefully just said, no, he's probably hungry now. Now you need to breastfeed. This is how you do it. But prior to that, no one teaches you how to be a teenage mom. No one teaches you how to breastfeed, and no one has the grace to say, okay, this happened. Let's support you. But I was fortunate enough to be in a home where my mom and my family supported me. I didn't even get there though.
Oh, did you have a C-section?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
It was terrifying for me, because I found out I was pregnant when I was 6 months. Then we went into labor at 7 months. And it was an emergency cesarean section. It was the craziest experience of my life. I didn't know I was in labor. So I just thought there was just a lot of pain. And my mom just gave me one look and was like, let's go. And I didn't know what let's go meant. She didn't say, oh, you're in labor now. No, she just like, let's go. So we get to the hospital and I just started bleeding. And no, everyone's rushing around me and everyone's like, don't push. Your son's a breech, he's a preem, and I don't know what they're saying. And they rushed me into the hospital. I had an emergency cesarean section. And for a good 2-3 days, I couldn't see my son, because I'm just post-op and he was in the neonatal ICU, so I couldn't walk there. So the entire delivery process, the labor, post-op, everything was so traumatizing, and no one said a single thing to me. So I don't really like to speak about that. Simply just for the protection of my son.
Okay.
But I'll speak a little bit on it. So the father of my son wasn't really present during that time. Like after finding out I was pregnant, it was kind of like, that's it, deuces, I'm out. And that's a story that many women speak of, right? And so that's kind of how it was when I went into labor. I went in with my mom. My mom held my hand through the entire process. Yeah. And even as my son grew up, it was just my mom and I and my son, and my stepdad. So it's very important for a father to be present in a child's life, regardless of age, whether it's a teenage pregnancy or if you're 25, it doesn't matter. And like you highlighted, it's a partnership. So I was very blessed that when I met my now husband, he took on that role very quickly. He scooped up my son and said, you're mine now, and I'm going to raise you as if you are my own. And thankfully, because of that, my son has someone to look up to and has a father figure to look up to. But even just generally, I think what we fail to see is that when kids grow up, it's natural for them to look at both parents and take something from the mom, take something from the dad. So the moment there is no dad to pull from, there's automatically a deficit, whether it's a girl child or a boy child. So when I was a teenage mom, it was not only lonely, not only terrifying, but so difficult. Everything that my peers were doing in grade 10, I couldn't do. When they were going out on weekends, when they were chilling and partying, I was at home with the child. When my son was crying all night and I had an exam the next day, I had to work 10 times harder to focus and try to pass my exam when other kids were just waking up in the morning like, oh, I got a good night's rest. So everything for me was 10 times harder. Thankfully, I had a support structure. I had my mom that said, you know what, this is tough. And if there's no change, you might not make it through high school. So she stopped working so that she can take care of my son so that I can finish high school. And like I always say, I thank God for her, but not everyone has my mom. So people need to understand that it's not a walk in the park. It's not I just fall pregnant and I can be a Taz and I can become a medical doctor. No, you work 10 times harder. The scrutiny, the stigma, everything is just placed on you, and you somehow have to break off all those shackles and be like, I'm gonna rise above it. So don't get me wrong, being a teenage mom is terribly difficult. So the impact on my mental health being a teen mom, I recall a week after I found out I was pregnant. Mind you, I still have to go back to school. And I went back to school, but I didn't tell anybody because when I told my family, it was taboo, right? And they were like, you don't tell anybody, people are gonna start talking about you, there's stigma. And then I was terrified. So I went to school, wore baggy clothes, wore sneakers, and because my feet were swollen and I couldn't fit into my school shoes. And people were just like, Taz always wears school sneakers, so it's not a weird thing, right? But I'm sitting there in an exam room terrified. Like, I hope no one knows that I'm pregnant. But on my way, I remember this day so clearly. After school, got dropped off, walked home, pregnant, with a pregnant belly, hidden, and just crying, and just like walking on this 5 kilometers going home, and just thinking, how did this happen? And the regret was, it wasn't even so much regret as it was, how did I disappoint my mom like this? And what does my future look like? How did I do this to my mom? So that was the pain that I felt. And then the depression really sunk in for me when the father of my child wasn't there. When my own father wanted nothing to do with me now because I felt pregnant. When my whole community was just gossiping about me and saying, how could she do this? She thought she was this girl and she went to a Model C school. Look at her now. So all of that. If it wasn't for my son, if it wasn't for the fact that I was bearing a child, I probably would have tried to commit suicide. Simply because of how mentally challenging it was. So when I was 15, I wasn't very aware of sexual and reproductive health. I'll tell you why. I grew up in a home that said you don't speak about sex and sex doesn't happen. Very weird when you think about it now because like, of course sex happens. But no one spoke about sex. Even when there was a hint of sexual violence in our community, it was shut down immediately. We don't talk about that. So that's how I grew up. And then when I went to school, they'll kind of talk about it in LO. At that time, it was more like, oh, there's a vagina, then there's a penis, but not you use condoms, these are contraceptive methods. And, there wasn't a lot of focus on how to prevent teenage pregnancy or just how to educate people on safe sex practices because it was still taboo. So why speak about it, right? So when I went to school, you kind of hear the older kids speaking about sex and, matric dance, it's gonna go down. But you just hear things like that. And in LO class, like I said, it's more the anatomy of the body, not the practical essence of what you can do if you want to have sex. So I didn't really have much. And when I'd go home, and you can see the type of person I am, I'd go to my mom and say, and sex? And she'd be like, you don't talk about that. And I said, but people are talking about it. And she just shut me down.
Do you think that was an opportunity for your mom to actually teach you about
100%. That was such a beautiful opportunity for her to say, my child's coming to me, let me create a safe space and say, sit down, let me teach you. Because it's so important that we understand, me now being a parent, that when my son comes to me and speaks about sex, if I don't educate him about sex, he's going to go to his friends or he's going to go to Google. And they will educate him, but not in the same way I could have educated him. I usually have this question to myself. Like I usually ask myself, like, what would I have done differently if I was 15, knowing what I know now? I don't think there was anything I could have done. But I do think that the structures around me could have done so many things differently. Because if we really look at a girl child, she's not just an individual, right? She comes with so many structures around her, the household, the family, the community, her school. So if we look at things that could change, we need to look at those structures. And then we can unpack each one of those. So what I feel people or parents can do differently in their home with their child, they first have to accept that children are going to have sex. Whether you speak about it or not, children are having sex. You can be in denial, but it's still happening. I can actually take it back to me and my son. So my son actually asked me about, where do babies come from? When he was 10. I was not ready. Oh no, I was not ready. I said, no, we'll talk about that again. And then when he was like 12, that's when I started having the conversation with him. So I would say around 12, because now it's not just curiosity, but they're also seeing things like, oh, my body's changing, the girl's body's changing. So they can almost put one and one together. So I would venture off and say maybe around 12. But yes, just to answer your question, what you can do at home. I think the thing that, let's not complicate it too much. The first thing you need to do is create a safe space for your child. A safe space, even before the sex talk. Your child needs to know that they can come to you with anything. If you haven't created that safe space, there's no way they're going to come to you. So that safe space just looks like they're coming home, they're having a bad day at school, right? Don't go and say, why do you look so miserable? Do this, do that. Just say, look, it looks like you're having a bad day. Do you want to come sit next to me and we can speak? Even if they don't want to speak, you say, it's okay if you don't want to speak, but know that I'm here. And once you can sow the seeds like that, by the time they get to a inquisitive age where they want to find out things, it's almost second nature for them to come to you and say, Mom, I heard this thing, they said sex is this, what is it? And that's how it is with my son and I. He just comes and says, oh, I'm so sexy. And I'm like, okay, I know I encourage this conversation, but it's just so open now. And he's like, oh, and condoms and contraceptives. Oh, what's the morning after pill? I'm like, and I'm an advocate for like open communication, but it's still a shock for me. So I think create safe spaces for your kids at home. Do your own research. You don't know everything as a parent. And things are changing. So go research and find ways to have the sex talk. It has to happen. You have to have the talk and find ways, find imagery, or like there are videos like child-friendly like videos and they delve more into like the anatomy, but it's fine. The child needs to know what a penis and a vagina is. So, essentially, yeah. So I think school in general and how they can help aid teenage pregnancy prevention, I think it's far beyond just the teachers. Because remember, these teachers also come from a community, right? that inform their way of thinking. So we need to take it a step back and just say, on a community level, we need to change our mindsets. And when we come to schools, allo is not enough. Life orientation, a 30-minute, 40-minute class is not enough to tell them about contraceptive methods and condoms and safe sex practices. It's just not enough. And who really pays attention? Let's just be honest. It's at the end of the day, kids are tired. So we need to do more. And just to extend it even more, yes, in allo maybe they tell you about contraceptive methods, right? But I don't know where to go for those contraceptive methods. So there's the theory of it, but where's the practical implementation of it? So if schools can think a little bit outside of the box, and maybe we have mobile contraceptive clinics at schools, so that the kids don't have to get taxis or skip class to try and go to a community health center just to get contraceptive methods. So schools need to, like I said, on the education level, they also have to do a little bit more, but also implement practical things for the children. I know they can't have condoms at schools, but if you had a wellness center or a contraceptive clinic at school that came once a month, so that the girls could say, okay, once a month I could get my contraceptive method. Do you know what I mean? So yes, I just think we need to think bigger, because as it stands, no one wants to do the talk at home. Then you send your kid to school and you hope that teachers will do the talk. Then the teachers don't even have the sex talk. And then your kid's just floating and having to figure it out by themselves. So if I was looking at myself now as a 15-year-old and I was exploring sex and I had a bigger sister being me, what I would say is don't rush into it. I'm not saying don't have sex, I'm just saying don't rush into it. Get the tools you need in order to make an informed decision. So when I say tools, I'm talking about explore what contraceptive methods are out there so that you don't have a teenage pregnancy. Look at look at where you can get condoms so you don't get STDs or HIV. And really look at the partner that you really want to go and explore with and say, does this person respect me? Is there consent involved? Do I want to do this out of my own? Or am I being coerced to do it? So there's so many things around teenage pregnancy and just safe sex practices as a whole that I wish I had explored a little bit more. Because at that age, you think everyone else is having sex, let me also have sex. So it's peer pressure. You also look around and there's maybe an older guy and you almost feel you have to have sex. But what everyone needs to understand, especially young girls, is you have a say. You can say no. You don't have to. If someone says you have to have sex with me, you don't have to. And just to shed light, or this maybe is a little bit off topic, but not so much off topic, the contributors of teenage pregnancy is not only that our parents don't speak to us. We also have to understand that there are kids that don't know about contraceptive methods because the education part of it in communities, in schools, is lacking. And sexual violence in South Africa is such a massive thing. Just to shed some light, the WHO actually says that there's 1 in every 8 women that experience sexual violence before the age of 18. And that rings true to our context in South Africa. So when people listen to this, I want them to appreciate the sensitivity that comes with teenage pregnancy, and then girls aren't just waking up wanting to fall pregnant. That they also get into situations where they in age discordant relationships, where they feel they have to engage in sex, where they are subjected to sexual violence, and because there were no safe spaces created for them at home, at school, they don't know where to go. So they don't speak, and when they do come home, they're already pregnant. So, yes.